Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, and this is Legal Matters, the program that's designed to address the timely, critical, and sometimes contentious issues that are facing consumers and businesses today. It's legal information, it's practical solutions, and straight talk about a wide variety of topics that affect your work and your home life. Again, we're joined by Jackie Grasso and David Bazar from Audette, Bazar, Cordiero, Grasso law firm in East Providence. And we have quite a few different topics that we're going to touch on today. Some of it family law, some of it workplace law, civil law, criminal law. So let's get started. I think where we probably would want to start is by saying we know that email is quite common today, but what, if anything, about it is private? Is it an invasion of privacy? Is there such a thing as an invasion of privacy between spouses, parent and child, employer, employee? What's legal now and what's even considered reasonable? And we wonder whether or not the stakes are different now that there's computer technology and the internet and email. So we're going to begin with an item that's been very recently in the news, and let's see if we can explore the black and the white and the gray. So here it is. A Michigan man faces felony computer misuse charges. He says that there was domestic violence and child neglect, and it was a source of concern over his cheating spouse's affair. Apparently, this started as an internet law that they wanted to protect the stealing of trade secrets or identities, but they're using that now to levy a felony charge against this man who just says, I logged onto my wife's computer. It was on her Gmail account. We share it. Let's flesh out some of the issues. What are your thoughts about this?
Want to start?
Yeah, I think what we have to do is go way, way back to many, many centuries ago with the theory of trespass. And this is really what the bottom line is. What's trespass? I mean, originally, now it's defined as an unlawful intrusion into someone's privacy or someone's property. When it originated under the common law of England, it was trespass to someone's property. It was trespass to land. So that's where it starts. So the underlying charge there is trespass and invasion of privacy. Now you fast forward ahead, now we talk about Fourth Amendment issues, which is your right to privacy. However, David and I were discussing this today, saying, well, how would that apply in the sense that you have a right to be free from any invasion of privacy from the government?
Right, that's the thing. With the Fourth Amendment, when you start talking about invasion of privacy, you get into the reasonable expectation of privacy test, and the Fourth Amendment's talking about intrusions into your privacy by the government.
By the government,
state or federal.
And I don't want to derail this conversation focusing on this Mr. Walker here, but then with the Patriot Act that happened as a result of the terrorism, some of those laws or that seems to have some movement too. And I don't want to derail this conversation.
Right.
But
Again, for national security.
And there are some conflicts between different laws that were already on the books in the law that was created through the Patriot Act as to what the government can and cannot do. But to get back to the Michigan man,
issue.
So as Jackie said, the computer law that's on the books has encompassed some of this old trespass law that we've had since common law developed in England. And we looked at it, Jackie and I, and it's not black and white whether or not this man would face the same types of charges in Rhode Island as Michigan is trying to charge him with. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It may be that he trespassed, but let's try to figure out what he trespassed on or to. Because as I understand the facts of that case, he and his wife jointly own the computer. So if you talk about trespassing into property, he's not trespassing into property by turning on the computer or using the computer. It's his computer. You can't trespass on your own property. The issue then is the email that's stored on the computer a separate piece of property that under Rhode Island law could be trespassed on? And then you have to look at what the statute says. Is you trespass, you take, use the property or the computer information for some fraudulent reason.
Information that you weren't entitled to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
So now, let's look at that. Was he using that for fraudulent purposes? No. Probably not.
No.
In fact, his justification for it was because he was afraid that she was going to introduce the children or child that they had into some dangerous situation, and he wanted to find out what that might be. That may be justification for why he did it, but it may not be a defense if he is in fact properly charged under Michigan law for violating her privacy or going into her computer or her program.
So one expert in electronic privacy said that the fact that one of the gray areas is that that laptop was shared, as you pointed out, but even on a shared laptop, there may or may not be two separate accounts with two separate passwords, and they had some discussion about whether or not this very Mr. Leon Walker was a computer technician, so he would certainly have some skills and could technically hack in.
Well,
would
that's
that make a difference?
Yeah, I just thought I was going to talk about that
Right.
earlier. There's a difference, I think, between hacking in to her email versus your wife telling you what your password is and
Right.
something that you customarily do. For example, you file tax returns every year. Spouses commonly do this. One spouse signs the tax return for both, okay? It's
Yeah.
never been a problem up until an issue arises many
Or
years later.
You could even go
in a
back
divorce.
just to mail. You know,
yeah,
U.S.
mail,
postal mail.
yeah.
Yes.
Mail comes into the house, you get along well. Has it ever been an issue in the house if the wife opens up the mail addressed to the husband or vice versa?
Yeah.
Now, there may be an implied acceptance of you doing that, or an implied invitation to do it, that once the marriage broke down, in that case, maybe they had an agreement that he could go on and use her account. He had her email or password information and was able to do that. So I guess, as we were saying, the question is, did he hack in,
Yeah.
or had he used it with permission before?
And what about the question about what he did with it? Okay, if the state is a no-fault divorce state, you're cheating on me, we're divorced, that's it. That's one issue, and I found it because I found it on your computer and it says that you were having some liaison. But he not only saw this information on that Gmail account, but also contacted or forwarded or provided it to the first husband,
Yes.
who was the father of this of the son, who he was fearing some danger would befall. And it was, I guess, the second husband she was having an affair with. I mean, all of that is a lot of intrigue, but the fact that he forwarded and did something with it, is that a separate issue that causes it to be a felony? I mean, the fact of the matter is, he might have done something criminal by what? Forwarding that information versus trying to protect the child?
This is where we have to really pick apart whatever the statute reads there, but did he have a right to have that information to begin with? Okay. Now, by that, I go back to what I said before. Was it something that he customarily did when the relationship was going well? Did they read each other's emails? Like David said, were you reading each other's mail, paper mail?
Right.
So is that something they customarily did? Did he do anything wrong? Did he commit a fraud by forwarding that email to the father of this woman's, or the first husband, whomever it was? Was there any crime there? You know, we'd have to, you got to really pick apart the statute.
So to try to do it in hypothetical terms, in looking at the Rhode Island statute, part of the Rhode Island statute, as I read it, and Jackie and I went back and forth on this a little bit, is that there has to be some fraudulent purpose. Well, certainly in the case that we were talking about in Michigan, there's no fraudulent purpose in trying to send that to the first husband to protect the child. If he was sending it out and changing things in it and making things up, that would violate the Rhode Island statute, because it talks about fraudulent publication of things and changing things that are in emails or masquerading as somebody else. He wasn't doing any of those
No.
things. The next thing is, and I think it's important that Jackie was saying, is if he had it properly, then the forwarding of it doesn't change anything, as I read the Rhode Island statute, and I assume perhaps the Michigan statute as well.
But the other issue, too, is electronic media. Can there be a right to privacy with electronic media where I could accidentally send you an email that I didn't want you to read, and the click of the button, it can be all over the world, and it's happened?
Yes.
So how much privacy can she expect, knowing that you're sending something over electronically, over the wires, or and how much, I mean, how does she know where that's going to
How
end
much
up?
privacy is there anyway?
Yeah.
Is there ever an issue then about what's legal for how he decided he would use it? Number one, yes, we discussed that he forwarded it to that first husband, the father of the child. How about the fact that he might have wanted to use it for his own personal use, which was to petition for sole custody of that child? Would that change? Would that be legal and admissible as evidence? Or
Personally, no, it wouldn't be admissible as evidence, and I think the reason would be because it was not obtained under proper circumstances,
Okay.
unless she left her email account open.
Right.
open?
And let's go back a step. there's other ways of getting that. And so from giving legal advice perspective, if you're involved in a family court situation and you think there's things on an email account that you need to get for your legal proceeding, your lawyer can subpoena the records from the email provider, perhaps, or do a request for production, which is where you send a discovery request to the other side and ask them to provide all of these emails. Now, as a practical matter, if he knows this email exists and it's not provided, it'll be interesting on a motion to compel them to provide it, how you let the court know that.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, when it comes to email, you have the email that you send, you're the sender, there's the recipient, there's the ISP provider, so that is actually out in the public domain anyway.
That's what I was
So
talking
it's
about
not
before.
just a matter of, did I check her computer, but talk to the recipient, talk to the ISP if you need, and then you'd have to subpoena
You'd
that,
have
I
to
guess.
subpoena that.
You'd
Yes.
subpoena it. And some of what we were talking about with that conflict between the Patriot Act and the ISP providers and the other people who have control over what goes on the internet is some law says that you lose your expectation of privacy after a certain period of time. I think it may be 30 days or
I read something
like
about
that.
180 in some states. Is that a
Yeah.
state-to-state thing,
I
David?
think it's federal law, to
It
be
is federal,
honest.
okay.
Maybe it's state to state, but if it is state to state, what applies? You know, because where is it where it's hosted or the state where you wrote it? But in any event, maybe it is state to state. However, whatever that number is, all that changes, and this goes back to the Fourth Amendment. If the government wants to get something, and the Patriot Act now starts stepping in, they're supposed to get a warrant to
Exactly.
get information that's protected within that space of time that hasn't gone out yet, which means the government has to get a judge to sign off that there's reasonable or
Probable cause, they need that, okay.
to get that.
Okay.
As opposed to something that's now out there beyond whatever the number of days it is, they just have to issue a subpoena, much like a lawyer in a civil case would do.
I don't know if it's a nuance, but I did read somewhere in there that it was not just a matter of it being, it might have been a matter of how it was transmitted, whether or not it would be admissible, but if it was a matter of how it was stored, and it was stored someplace, then therefore they could have access to.
Yeah,
They
the
mean
ISP provider.
The ISP
Right.
provider.
Because when you hit that button send, you're going through a service provider.
Yes.
And it's just like mail, carrying mail. Your mail is in an envelope,
It
but
just
how many
gets there
hands?
faster.
Yeah, it gets there. How many hands does it? How many
Passed
hands?
along.
Yeah, it's passed along. Can you sue your mailman for carrying your mail to your door? Okay. As long as he doesn't open your mail, no. I mean, he doesn't have a right to open your mail, but it's the same. I guess it's the same expectation. You just have two different modes of transferring the information. One electronically, one actually, physically.
I guess there's one other aspect of this. Now, they say that much of this is pivotal because it was a shared computer. Let's say the case is that there's a husband who has a computer and the wife who has a computer. Does it matter if he obtained that from her computer? It wasn't a shared computer. It was hers. And if he didn't have to hack into a password, because not all computers are password protected. Some people just don't click the button and make that happen. What's the issue about invasion of privacy or not? Or is it a felony or not in those cases?
You know, it's actually going to go back to...
Fraudulent?
Well, what's the trespass?
Yeah.
If the
What is?
trespass is the computer, then there's no trespass because he had a right in that jointly owned computer situation to do it. And I would suggest to you, depending on what state you live in, that if you have a computer and your wife has a computer and you both obtained them during the marriage, that's
a marital
marital property
asset.
anyway.
That's a marital
Yeah.
asset.
So it doesn't matter if it was his computer, her computer. It matters, I think, and Jackie's the one who pointed this out to me, that if it's her email account and she has some expectation of privacy in her email account, then that may be the trespass, and that might be a problem, how you got into that.
Especially if he didn't have the password. But I know, for instance, like with my husband, he has, but we both work off the same computer. All I have to do is hit Outlook and the email comes up, mine and his.
Right.
Yes.
So where's the expectation of privacy?
Right.
There isn't. It's there.
And
you know?
it goes back, just like I said, to the mail, as Jackie was saying, signing returns and all that kind of thing. If you have a marriage where you share things like that, and now you're going through a rocky time and your husband's on your computer, I don't think all of a sudden, because now you don't get along as well, that it becomes a felony.
So now I have the one follow-up to that is, husband and wife still married, but for whatever reason right now they're not living together. He's out of the house, he comes back to the house maybe to visit the child, and there's a computer, and now this situation plays out. Now would you say that there's an invasion because he isn't really living there right now? They're at odds, ready to be divorced or whatever else, estranged. Now, is that an invasion of privacy, or just because the letter of the law is that they're still married?
I think you could make an argument there,
Yeah.
because he's no longer living in the same house. They're not sharing the same
Right.
Blended whatever.
items.
There's more issues too, I think, that you have to look at. Is it the same computer that they had during the marriage? And
That would matter?
Well, I think so.
Okay.
And did she, and even if it is, did she change the password and now has he hacked into it? I think, and Jackie talked about this before, if you have to hack in, I
That's
think
a difference.
that changes from if you're just using a password. If you had a situation where you shared passwords, you did this and that together, reading each other's mail with permission or implied permission, and now you've got this change of circumstances and the spouse is going to the extent of changing the password, and now you're snooping and hacking and trying to get in, I think that may change the
This
equation.
happens a lot, too, with cellular phones. I have a case, I had a case where that was an issue in a divorce, where the spouse had the other spouse's password to get into the voicemail, and unbeknownst to my client, didn't realize it until, many months later, but was getting into his voicemail and listening to all the voicemails. I think it's the same argument here, because he had no idea that she had the password.
Again, I think you have to look at the different statutes that may or may not apply. There's specifically statute that talks about computers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that if you read it broadly enough, it includes cell phones.
No, it
may.
doesn't.
I haven't read it that
I don't
closely.
think so.
I
There
don't
was
think so
actually
either.
even something that I didn't read in depth, didn't have the reason or the time to, but there was actually some distinction made about walkie-talkies, because it's a different form of transmission.
Yeah, and
Isn't,
you can hear it. Yeah.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's not private.
Not private.
It's not a private conversation. Anyone who has that same frequency can pick up whatever your conversation is, so it wouldn't fall under the same protection.
Okay, one other thing. Still, same issue, but not about the email. So instead of it being the email, instead the husband finds the wife's diary or journal. It's not locked, it's just,
It's out in the open.
it's out in the open.
Plain
So,
view.
Plain view, no
Plain
issue.
view.
Maybe not nice that he looks, but if he does,
What if
it's
he
open.
goes in her pocketbook
And takes
and takes it?
And what is that story?
Well, then you have a different story, because it's her property.
Isn't it their property? He might have bought her the pocketbook.
Well,
How
yeah,
technical is this?
that could
I-
be. Is it something
yeah.
she leaves out all the time? Is it something she had locked up in a cabinet? So everything is predicated upon the facts.
I've had clients come to me before who were in the middle of a divorce, and they don't leave anything in the house that they don't want their spouse to see.
Yeah.
It's either locked at work or locked in a trunk. I think the one fellow I remember locked everything in the trunk of his car. And I said, well, what about the extra set of keys? He said, no, I've got those too, locked in the trunk of the car.
Yeah.
Perfect. How about, for an example, if two people were dating, they had on occasion shared the same computer, they have this situation that shows up, well, the man finds that the girl's cheating on him, not nice certainly, he's suspecting that maybe her child's in some jeopardy. Now what happens? Invasion of privacy? Does that woman get to say, you're going to be charged with this felony, you're likely to go to jail for 5 years because you've invaded privacy? What happens with that occasion?
I think it would be the same. It would depend on the relationship. Are they living together? Are they not living together?
All of those things are factored in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And-
If they're not living together, there is an expectation of privacy.
Certainly. And
Yeah.
if it's her computer, they have no relationship ongoing after they broke up. I'm assuming we had a break up in this thing. They didn't live together. It wasn't ever his computer. Now you're much closer to violating the Rhode Island law, as I read it, than the husband and wife living together.
Okay. And what about the situation with parents, and let's start with underage children? Presumably, if you're parents, you're looking at your kids' email and their internet use to make sure that they're not doing something terrible. If you find something that shows that your child is involved in something that's legal, obviously the child doesn't get to sue you for invasion of privacy, right? It's your house and that's the way it is. But is the parent held liable and responsible for what that child is doing? And what happens if he doesn't do something about it when you know that he's seen that email and has seen that the child is involved in some very risky business?
I don't think the fact that it's an email changes any
Doesn't.
of the responsibility of what a parent has. Parents are responsible for some of their children's actions. We talked before about tort
Yes.
liability in
Yes.
parents, and there's a limitation on that. And depending on other situations, there may or may not be liability on a parent's part for the action of their child. Certainly, as far as the child's expectation of privacy, both with the parents and at school, and depending on let's go to the school situation for a second. The school owns the computer. It's the school's computer, child's email account, and the school goes into the child's email account. Have they trespassed on that child's expectation of privacy or property right in his email? Now, that would be an interesting question.
Well,
you
isn't
know
an
that?
email account given to the child by the school?
That would be an important distinction.
That's interesting.
Sure.
That's also
Or,
a fact.
how about this? The child's given the email through the school, but also happens to have his own private AOL account, and that's open on the desk. Well, if it's open on the desk, it's open.
It's a little different.
Suppose it isn't open on the desk, but it has no password, and they go John Doe
I think you have
at AOL.
I think you have a legitimate claim for invasion of privacy.
Yeah, I would think so, too.
Computer trespass.
And then staying with another variation of this child and parent situation, an adult child lives at home with the parent, same situation. Parent spots something that the adult child is involved in that's potentially illegal. He might likely be concerned about what kind of repercussions could be brought to him or herself. And is there an invasion of privacy of that adult child who has his own computer? They didn't hack into it, but it's certainly the child's computer. He owns it, but he's living at home. How does that play out?
Again, what's the expectation, I think, is part of what you have to look at. And secondly, going back to what Jackie had brought up before, did you hack in? Or did you just get in because you know and the child knows that you have the password, or they left it there for you? So the more important question there for the adult child and the adult parent is whether they're just going to ask them to leave the house, or if they're
Yes.
going to have a conversation with them about what's going on.
Yes, that's the reasonable thing to do. On the employer and employee situation, you are working for your boss. He gives you an email account, which is yours to work on his work, but you can also access your computer email, rather, the AOL or Gmail or whatever it is. And it's maybe during your break. Say it's your time. I don't know if it matters whether it's on break or not, but if it's your personal account, but you're using it at work, your employer has a right to workplace efficiency, but what about the employee's expectation of privacy while he's at work?
Well, if it's a work email, there is no
Right.
expectation of privacy, especially if the email account is obviously being provided by the employer.
Right.
But a private email is a little different.
I would think
You
so.
still have an invasion of
And
privacy.
you can also take that to another issue, is internet usage.
Yeah.
Because there's a history that's left on computers as somebody goes through the internet. And does the employer, as the owner of the computer, have the right to go onto your computer that you use in your little cubicle or office or wherever it is and check your internet history? And I think as the owner of the computer, they do have the right to do that. And so that you should be, careful as to what you do and don't do while you're at work.
Now, would that apply whether or not you had an HR manual that said, all emails are mine, all of your time is mine?
Well, let's give our advice to small businesses in
Yes.
the area. It's a great idea to have a manual that lays all of these policies out. And, you love to said, can people get that on the internet? I bet you there's a lot of websites where you could get a lot of boilerplate language that would cover this.
Yes.
And you absolutely, if you can, should have that kind of policy in writing.
And then everyone knows and is well advised in advance. If you don't want it to be seen, don't do it here,
Right.
or wait till you're out in the parking
I
lot.
think anytime you do anything on a computer over the internet, you always have to realize that it's subject to view from many different pair of eyes.
Yeah, and not only is it subject to view from just people who may go and look at it, but there's a history that's left, as I said,
Yeah.
and if something happens down the road, it's subject to subpoena for litigation, too.
Do you think that there will be more of this because, not just because of divorce situations, I guess so many states have no-fault divorce, but people are claiming that they have a reason to do this. This man, Mr. Walker, said, "I'm fearing for my stepchild's life." Those kinds of faulty or not faulty reasonings, does that matter? What do you think is going to happen?
The no-fault divorce in that is sort of a misnomer. It doesn't really matter. That's just the grounds to get divorced.
Yes.
Conduct has a lot of play in family court in a number of different areas. It's custody, it's visitation, it's distribution of assets. So you need to be aware that even though it's a no-fault state, that's just the grounds for divorce. You don't no longer have to prove adultery or some other conduct to get divorced, but it still has, the conduct has application to the result of the divorce.
We don't have much time to touch on this, but there's an issue about civil versus criminal law. The felony is the criminal side of it. What were they talking about in this Leon Walker and Clara Walker case that was possibly a civil suit that could have been waged?
Remember, trespass is a tort, which is a civil infraction.
That's the civil.
That's the civil side. So if somebody trespasses against your property, not only can they be charged criminally, but
They can be sued civilly.
they can be sued civilly if you can prove harm
Right.
to the
Tort
property or the individual.
requires damages.
You have to show damages.
Right, and so if she can show she was damaged in this case by having to hire an attorney, expend funds to get custody, or if she lost custody because of what he did, or any kind of harm that monetary damages can be awarded for, then there may be a civil claim.
And there's one other scenario based on some recent news when we were talking earlier about some harassment, which ended up in a boy committing suicide. You have a roommate, 2 computers. One roommate discovers through an email that this boy is having some homosexual affair. He feels harassed. He commits suicide. What's invasion of privacy? What's criminal? What's civil?
Yeah, well,
That's a case of first impression.
yeah, but
That's
I
gonna be
do,
interesting
I
to
do
resolve
think
that.
that roommates are not the same as spouses.
Yeah.
And one roommate may own his computer, the other roommate may own his computer, and that's the end of the story. You have a right to expect privacy in that.
Good to know. We've certainly covered a lot of topics today. We thank you for staying tuned. It's probably no surprise to anyone that your email isn't private, and even when you think it is, you're probably well advised to take some precautions to make it as secure as possible, whether it's mail or email. As we said, stored in multiple locations, so do be careful about that. We thank you for tuning in. Jackie, David, we thank you for being with us.
What are we talking about next time?
Perhaps immigration.
All right.
Our discussion of legal matters continues. We hope you will still join us. And you can email us at legalmatters@fullchanneltv.net. Thank you.